Have you ever wondered why Africa has so many borders, some of them as straight as if they were drawn by rulers? Welcome to History Time with me, Kafui Day, where we look at the Berlin Conference of 1884 and the effects it had on the geography, the culture, and the history of Africa. Take a moment, if you haven't already, to subscribe to this channel so that when new notifications come up, you'll be the first to know. My guest is Yao Anochie Frimpong, a lover of history. Welcome to the show, and today you are in black because of what we're going to be talking about today.
Definitely, my brother.
So why are you wearing black? What are you mourning?
I am mourning the fact that I'm an African. This is my continent. And if I can imagine that as you sit here, and I'm not joking, look at goose pimples on my body, as an eczema. And then I have part of my people in the Ivory Coast who think they are different from me. You know, they've produced great people. You know, recently when Ghana was playing in the African Cup, you came across several Akan names. And then a great musician, the one who sang Zoblazo, Mewe, you know, who otherwise should have been a Ghanaian, as my good self, now calling himself or themselves Ivorians and French. And then you two, you sit here, Kafui, that is an Ewe name. And then look at that small, tiny country called Togoland, which should have been one of the regions of Ghana. Now it's a country, you know, containing a sizable number of your own brothers and sisters. Not only these things, you go to the north, we have the Mosi people, who should have been part of the Dagombes. When I recount all this, I think I have to wear black today.
So what you're saying is that by these divisions across Africa, ethnic groups have
They
been
have
split
divided
up
our people
into different countries.
Brothers and sisters, more or less being made enemies to each other. If you are traveling between here and Nigeria, you meet a lot of artificial borders. You meet people who speak virtually the same language as you do, but they think they are different from you. This is very sad. It is pathetic.
And we can tie all of this to events that happened 140 years ago, 1884, and it went into 1885, but it started in 1884, the Berlin Conference. What is the background to this conference that led to the scramble for Africa, the division of Africa, almost cutting Africa up like a big wedding cake?
Okay, the background. In the case of the background, we can split into two. The African position and then the universally accepted position. The African position is smaller, so if we can talk about that one. Africans believe that before the white people came to settle on our land, we were one people. If there was any division, it was because of big rivers like the Volta, the Niger, the Congo, or mountains like the Afajato, like the Kilimanjaro, and then the Congo mountain, whatever. You know, so that when you find one group of people here, beyond the mountain, there could be a different ethnic group. But all these people were, by and large, trading together and having almost every culture together, you know. And that was the reason why when the Europeans came in to discover Africa, they felt that it would not be possible for them to conquer us or to split us. And so they began that system of trading called the barter trade, where, as everybody knows, they brought the European goods along the coast, set fire just to alert the local people that we have arrived. And then they will retreat to their ships on the high seas. Our people too will come and place some lots there. This were the exchange going on for centuries because the Elmina Castle, which was the first to be put up here, was in far back in 1480s. So for centuries before you arrived at 1884. So from the African point of view, they dealt with us for these centuries, trying to steady us, whether they could rule us, whether they could overpower us, whether they could fight us. Then they realized it was not possible until they made sure they had persuaded some of our people, some of the chiefs, who were, and I should admit, I should concede that at all material times, as in all human societies, there had been wars among the African societies or tribes. Then the white people would come in, instead of sacrificing the slaves, the captives, we would buy them. Or instead of using them as common slaves there, we will give you money for these people. We'll give you more weapons. So from this silent trade or barter system came the slave trade, which lasted for 300 years. So with this system of trade, Africa lost a lot of its human capital, human resource. And so from our background, we believe that it was when they discovered that we could not stand them. That was when the Berlin Conference took place. But from the universal historical point of view, the Europeans had always been trading since the Portuguese discovered Elmina, and they found the trading in ivory, gold, humans, and all manner of things, even spices, very, very useful. Cotton, because they needed cotton to feed their mills over there. They found it very profitable. And then emerged some European powers like Germany, France, Britain. These were the three major powers. Then the smaller ones being Portugal, Spain, Holland, Sweden, Belgium. These countries felt that if they do not find a way of regularizing their activities in Africa, there will come a time when there will be a civil war in Europe among themselves.
Because of access or denied access to Africa.
Trading routes in Africa, trading places in Africa.
So it was a business decision.
It was a business decision. So Otto von Bismarck, the then Chancellor of Germany, felt it was a proper way of bringing together the European powers as we knew then to give a legal basis to their trading activities here and to ensure that politically there will not be a clash between any two or more of these states, all because of their interest in Africa. So these were the reasons why they met in Berlin, and not only Berlin, as you rightly said in the beginning. The meeting started in Berlin. Later on, in 1884, it would take a whole year because Berlin started, later London, and then Paris, and then Brussels. So it rotated until eventually there came a full settlement agreement to the effect that each of the European powers knew where they had to operate. And the two major powers in Europe then became the major beneficiaries. In fact, France had an area estimated to be 3.75 square miles of African land.
Million.
3.75 million of African land for themselves.
How did they determine who got what?
We'll talk about that. And then the British also had 2.0 million square miles of African land. And then the determination as to who got what, that was the problem. And that is what has brought a division between the Ewe people. So sad. Don't forget, we have Ewes in Benin. Mm-hmm. We have some in Togo and some in Ghana. Even
some on the western border of Nigeria.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And why? The other day I saw an Ewe man who was talking about another woman and said, this man is not even a Ghanaian. He comes from Togo, forgetting that we are just one people.
Yeah, it's madness.
So what happened actually was that on the tables, the decks of Berlin, Paris, or London, they drew up the map of Africa and decided to partition Africa among themselves. So you see that where we started from was virtually the scramble for Africa that would lead to the partition of the continent. And let us begin by saying that these people who drew the map of Africa knew only the coastal belts of Africa, because these were the areas where they had their forts and castles. These were the areas where they bettered their ships and met people and traded with. These people could not venture into the hinterland because of the fact that they felt Africans initially were savage people. They did not know the geography of the area, and above all else, they were dying in their thousands because of mosquito-related diseases. So as they met there, the only thing they knew was the coastline of Africa, and that was what they believed was Africa. Now, for the first time, they had to put down pencils and rulers in order to partition out areas or boundaries for themselves. So this was what they did. And then from your question, what happened was that you will see certain areas drawn according to scale on paper, but in practice affects different cultures, people with diverse histories, languages, and religions on the ground. And we have to give examples. And you see, before going to the examples, what they did seriously affected otherwise independent empires. And the most classic of them was Ashanti, which was an empire of itself. Now, for the first time, whether Ashanti liked it or not, it had to be frozen and merged with the very ethnic groups or entities they had conquered and ruled. This time, you are at one with them, at par with them. Now, you go to a place like northern Nigeria, or the entire Nigeria, which had to be drawn up as a British territory in theory, in practice, bringing together people from the north who were basically Muslims as against Southerners who did not know anything about even the Christian religion, Islamic religion, and any other thing apart from their own independent way of living. Now they become part of a certain system up there.
So it was a mishmash of people who prior to that would not have been together.
Historically different.
Yeah.
And then you talk about, and then language barriers too. How do you say that the people of Nigeria, for example, the Igbos, to merge up with the Hausa Fulani people, no historical friendship, nothing, no trading otherwise existing between them. And then to be in one country with the Yoruba people, also not having anything in common at all with the Igbo people, and at the same time not having anything in common with the Hausa people. Now you bring them together. Then in other countries like Uganda, the Buganda and the Buyoro people were completely antagonistic to each other, always fighting between themselves. Now, by virtue of the Berlin Conference, these people, these two otherwise antagonistically existing kingdoms, being brought together to form one country called Uganda.
I'm sure the same thing happened in the southern
and
Africa as well.
And then when you come to southern Africa, the same thing. When you go to southern Africa, the tribes over there, the Zulu and the Xhosa, never saw eye to eye with each other. Now you are forced to come together. Now come to our own West Africa. We have mentioned it, that we had the Ashanti, who otherwise wouldn't have wished to be with the coastal people. And then the Ewe people definitely wouldn't have wished to come under the British for any good reason. They traded with the Gas, the Krobo people, the Akwamu, and the Akwapim people, but never agreeing to be under anybody. But because of the Berlin Conference, they were crushed and were made to come under the British. And here I mean the Anglo people.
Indeed. Which African people were consulted when the continent was being cut up like, I don't know, like...
So the Africans were partitioned without their consent or prior knowledge.
They didn't even
or
know this conference
information.
was happening.
They didn't know what was happening in Berlin, in London, in Paris. They didn't know. So the effect, I mean, your question directly takes me to the effect on the ground.
But before even that, how come a small country like Belgium ended up having such a huge country like Congo, which is multiple times bigger than Europe?
So because they became a beneficiary of the Berlin Conference, they became a beneficiary. And then you will see that the other countries which did not have much colonies here, like the Portuguese and the Spanish, would be compensated to have colonies in America. And I mean Southern America, countries like Brazil, Argentina, Peru, and the like. So everybody benefited to a very high extent, putting the whole world map together.
How about the Germans? I mean,
The Germans also
what
benefited.
did they get?
The Germans benefited. The Germans at that time had Tanganyika, and they also had a big chunk of Southern Africa, what today we call Namibia. You see, what you should know is that if the German part would not, Germany, their colony would not be big in terms of area, in terms of resources, they got the biggest diamond field in Namibia. And then in West Africa, they also benefited from getting Togo and then Cameroon. So they really had a lot. Everybody had what would satisfy them. And those who didn't have much on the continent would have it elsewhere. And then also, as we're saying, another effect was that certain countries were not much troubled and they were left intact. Largely the Northern African countries, Egypt, and then Morocco, and then the Algeria. Algeria went to France, Morocco to
France as well.
to the French as well, and then Egypt, the British. But these countries,
And Algeria to the French as well.
yes, these countries were left intact because more or less they were like Islamic kingdoms existing on their own before the advent of this scramble. And so they were left intact. And then also other things happened. Like, for example, Niger, Niger, the English gave part of the northern territory of Nigeria, which became Niger. That's why they have the same country. Niger is a French for Niger, and French for Niger, and that Niger is about the river Niger. So Nigeria is the Niger area, and then the northern part becoming Niger. And the British were much more interested in fishing grounds in Newfoundland. So they exchanged Niger for Newfoundland.
So these guys were just doing these
Yes.
transactions.
Yeah, and then also the Germans were given Cameroon so that the French would have the whole of Morocco. So that was what happened.
So bargaining was going on, negotiating was going on, horse trading was going on.
Without the prior consent or concurrence of the very subjects of the partition.
And when this conference had happened, America was maybe 100 and something years independent. What was America's role in
America
the
would
Berlin
not have
Conference?
a direct role because America itself was a colony, and they had always stood up against colonization. And that was the reason why, even when they brought some freed slaves to Africa, that's Liberia, they did not rule them, but they gave them their independence to rule themselves. And that is also the reason why we refer to Ghana as the first independent African state in sub-Saharan Africa, all because Liberia was not actually colonized. But the interest of America was the fact that this was a very vast country, virtually richer than each of the European powers standing alone. And they had brought up or given birth to big multinational companies.
So Firestone, the rubber company, was based in Liberia.
Kaiser.
For their tires.
Yeah, you know Kaiser.
Kaiser, yes.
Interested in
Valco.
aluminium. Very good. So all these companies, we just lay back and see what will happen. So they were more or less not primary in terms of the scramble for Africa.
Would you say,
but they had secondary interest.
You would say USA was like an observer? They had an observer status at the conference?
They were observers. And they
were
were
very
not
interested
active participants, but passive recipients because of their interest, which later on would become so bare in the 50s and 60s in Africa. For example, why would Lumumba be killed? Because they found that he was a friend to Nkrumah, and Nkrumah belonged to the Soviet bloc. So that vast country, which is about the richest in terms of resources in the world,
Congo,
will go to the Eastern Bloc. America would not accept that. So they will have to be in hand with Belgium in order to sacrifice Patrice Lumumba. So they were there as passive observers, but very eventually will become active participants on the African continent.
Whoa! Now let's talk about the effect on the people whose lands were being cut up like a cake.
The first effect would be that they did not understand why they would just wake up one morning to be called French territory or more or less citizens, English, Belgian, whatever.
Because I can imagine if you were living in a place like Ahlao, that area, all of a sudden, you would probably even have the border passing through your house.
Yeah.
You could sleep in Ghana or Gold Coast and then go to your kitchen in Togo.
Togo. And then when I went there recently, what I saw, which I did not like, you wanted, let's say, drugs to buy, medicine. And then they tell you that, oh, it's on the other side. And then a boy will run and greet the soldiers there because they knew them, and buy it for you. Or if it was a long journey, they will sit on a motorbike to go and buy for you. And you see that they were just one people. I won't say they were. They are one people. But if you agree, or if you are part of the French, then when you go to the other side, you find the people speaking French because they teach them French at school. But the local language is the same anyway.
Yes.
And they cross to this side, the English side, to marry women. And in the evening, the performance of the marriage rites was nothing that would scare the people because it was
same people.
You understand? The white man tells us that you are different from the other. So this was one thing happening here. And in practice, by and large, I would say our people would not budge. They were not stupid. No, they fought. In the case of the Ashanti, for example, they resisted it vehemently, and that led to the deportation of their king, Prempeh I. And then on another occasion, when the British came in as a result of the Berlin Conference to demand the golden stool of the Ashanti, because they felt that the golden stool was the power, that's the center of authority of the Ashantis. But once that authority had shifted to the British, how dare you continue possessing that golden stool? So the white people had to come and take the golden stool away. And that will lead to another war called the Ya Asantewa War. So what we refer to as the Ya Asantewa War, thinking that it was an ordinary war between the British and the Ashantis, all because they wanted the golden stool, was something deeper, greater that we wanted the full annexation of Ashanti. You know, your king has been taken away. You people are still organizing. You want to come together and then let us take the spirit of Ashanti away. All emanating from the premise of the Berlin Conference. Now, so in the case of the Ashanti, by 1900, having lost the Yasantiwa War, and thanks to the invention of the Peri-Martin bomb, you know, the Yasantiwa herself and a lot more of the Ashanti chiefs would be deported to go and join Prempeh in the Seychelles Island. These people, the Bawule people of Ivory Coast, would also fight. And they kept on fighting until 1907 when they were completely subdued. The Igbo people also fought until 1919 before they were conquered. And then the Dimka people of Sudan would also fight until 1927. And then we are told that the Jola people of Senegal fought them until they were conquered in 1920. That was not all. Samori Toure, who formed an empire between Guinea and Senegal and a portion of Mali, kept on fighting for 8 years before eventually he was captured and he had to take poison to end his life. So this was what happened here. So Berlin Conference, I will tell you that, gave rise to the same fighting
resistance
and
against it.
Instability on our continent. Resistance will lead to instability. And then not only there, you go to Southern Africa, Southeastern Africa, in the Bele and the Shona people also fought.
Zimbabwe. Yeah.
In Zimbabwe. And then in Nigeria, Namibia, Southwestern Africa, the Herero fought the Germans, and in the end, between 1914 and 1918, 3/4 of the people, and I mean millions of them, had been killed, just as happened in Congo. And another effect, as we are saying, was that on the ground, people who were otherwise one and the same were split into 3 different identities. In the case of the Bakongo people, they were split into 3. Congo DR, Democratic Republic of Congo, now going to the Belgians, and then Republic of Congo going to the French, and then Angola going to the Portuguese. These 3 states were together initially as one. So that's the sad aspect of it. In the case of the Ashanti, they didn't feel the negative impact more because the other Akans were their own siblings, like the Akwapem, Achem, Akwamu, Akwapem, and Zema, Sefi, and others. And then they had the same culture. People with different cultures, like the Ewes, were always there fighting and trading allies. And that is the reason why when you go to the Volta region today, you come across a lot of Akan enclaves, Akan names, wherever. So they didn't feel it, man. Then the guys, otherwise, who were not related to the Akans, were always trading with them. So in the case of the Gold Coast, the impact was not very severe. And then the Northerners too saw the Ashantis as their brothers. So it wasn't severe. But in other areas, they felt it so much, just as the Buganda one and the Buyoro one that I was referring to.
And so these cleavages and divisions continued up until the independence era and basically formed the map of Africa that we have.
That was it.
Now.
But before the independence era, Kafui, the greed of the white man exhibited itself in the immediate aftermath of the First World War. The First World War was between 1914 and 1918. Immediately after the First World War, when the war was fought in Europe and Africa had no hand in the war, what happened was that Germany, that had been defeated in the war, lost its territories to the conquerors. Yes, the victors.
So Togo went?
Togo went to Togo was divided into two. Part of Togo was made part of the Gold Coast,
which is the Volta region.
The Volta part of the Volta, not all. Please not don't make a mistake.
Not all.
The Angola land. We have to be very jealous about that.
Thank you.
The Angola land had always been part of Ghana, and many people did not know that, and we have to stress it all the time. But the northern part, like
Yes.
Ho,
Ho
Ho,
upwards.
and then also people who thought that Boku and Yendi had always been part of Ghana was also not true. They were part of the German Togo land. Then the other side fully went to France, and then
which is now Togo.
Togo. Then you go to Nigeria and this place,
Cameroon.
You know, part of Cameroon, you know, became part of Nigeria.
Okay, so you have that Bamenda problem.
The Bamenda, so English speaking, you know, English speaking
Cameroon.
Cameroon, and then French speaking Cameroon. The English speaking is the Bamenda part.
Which is still part of Cameroon now.
Cameroon,
but they want to be part of Nigeria.
Yeah, they want to be either on their own or part of Nigeria,
okay.
because of linguistic problems.
Exactly.
You know, and then when you go to southern Africa, to South Africa was given Namibia to colonize, and to the far east, Tanganyika was quickly stripped and given to Britain.
So Tanganyika became Tanzania later
Tanzania,
on.
Tanganyika
And Zanzibar.
The two islands came together. But Tanganyika initially
was a German colony.
German, and the English, the British took over.
Because they lost the war. If they had won the war, I'm sure a lot of Africa would have been German speaking.
Almost the whole of Africa would have been German.
So they just quickly rearranged.
So you see that even after the First World War, Africa will still suffer from the effect of the partition of Africa.
My own grandma, who was born in the early 1900s, has a German Christian name.
Oh, it's true.
Yes.
In Ghana,
yes.
There are so many.
Johebert.
So a lot of names.
Yes.
Like a lawyer friend of mine.
Von Bakustein is a German name.
Yeah.
Von Balmus is a German name, but these are Everett.
Mr. Gar, a lawyer called Gar.
Yes.
He's quite fair, and I asked him why if I said that my ancestors
are German.
Yeah, so that's the way.
Yeah. And they brought the church also, the Bremen.
The Bremen
mission
to the Volta region.
So these are the effects stemming from 1884. These are the things that we are experiencing even now.
And then more effects was that when they took these huge colonies for themselves, they came to realize eventually that some of them were bigger than they could manage, and some too were completely poor. In the case of the Gold Coast, it was found to be so wealthy in terms of resources. And indeed, the British would always go to places that they would find resources.
I'm glad you said this, because I heard that somebody was trying to analyze how the British and the French thought about colonies. So the French were more interested in size, because they were like soldiers, they were military. So they wanted, the more land you have, the more powerful you are. And the British were more interested in what you could get out of the resources.
Very technical.
So you have huge countries like Algeria and huge. The French colonies are very huge.
Niger.
Most of them are desert,
and you will not find anything. But what you are saying also brings to mind something we nearly forgot. You see, in the partition of Africa, certain countries were carved such that the British, or I don't want to say the British, the Europeans would have a coastline, a forest, and a desert at the same time, just to supplement the desert area very dry. And that's why a country like Nigeria, they would come down south just because they needed the coastal belt and go far north. And another reason was that of Sudan. You have far south and then the very north, which would have nothing to do with the southern people, just because they needed the forest and what the forest contained, just to be able to make for whatever they will lose in the desert area.
And no wonder now we have even a split. You have Sudan Chad, and then South Sudan now, where the South Sudanese are mainly African and Sudan is mainly Arab. But a question before you continue: what was the effect of the Berlin Conference on Ethiopia? Was Ethiopia touched?
Ethiopia was not touched because in about 1896, the Italians went with 10,000 soldiers, and Menelik, the king of Ethiopia, defeated them.
The emperor.
So the only one country that was secure from the effects of the Berlin Conference was that ancient Christian country called Ethiopia.
No wonder that the AU headquarters symbolically are based
Yeah, because
in Ethiopia.
because you see, when there was this trouble between the Morovia group and the Casablanca group, and Ghana belonged to the Casablanca group, you know, it took one country whose leader had not experienced colonialism to be called the most experienced leader on the African soil, and indeed the king of them all, to be able to call them together in his capital, so that both sides, both blocks, the Casablanca bloc and then the Morovia group, will come and iron out their differences and then set up the Organization of African Unity.
And this would be Emperor Haile
Haile
Selassie.
Yes.
Ras-
His Imperial
Majesty
Emperor,
Haile Selassie.
Rastafari.
Yes, and because that for those who don't know, that is actually his title, Rastafari, and the Rastafarians took his title to form
as
their
religion. Yeah.
Indeed.
And then what the question that we were on before, I just brought in the idea of Chad, Nigeria,
Which was
Sudan,
a good detour, anyways, because it was useful.
very useful.
Yes.
Was the fact that when they settled down to rule the areas that had been brought into their domain, they discovered that some of the areas were ungovernable. I mean, not easy to penetrate. Some of the areas were not very accessible. Some of the areas highly Islamized and did not like the Western
Influence,
Europe. And some areas exceptionally poor, and the people didn't need anything there. So in areas that they felt they did not gain much, they forced them into plantations like Congo, forced the people to plant for the white men in order to feed their companies and corporations in Europe. And then certain areas like the Gold Coast, they used indirect rule because they already had powerful institutions, monarchies on the ground. So ruling the people was not difficult. Why indirect rule? Because they didn't want to spend much on administration. So eventually, they restricted themselves to administering the people and then setting up infrastructure and then roads. Then when it came to...
So all these roads and the railway lines basically led from the plantations to the ports.
To the ports, so to be able to... It was part of the colonial policy. Then when it came to educating the people, they were not interested. No. And they forced the missionaries to do that work.
So that's how come you have the
Presbyterian, Anglican,
Catholics,
and then the Methodists, initially or originally having all the schools and then hospitals.
So that's how come a lot of the Cape Coast schools are church schools.
Yes.
The old schools.
All of them.
The Sardel, Mfantsipim.
Yeah. And imagine when Mfantsipim was far back in 1876. And it took up to 1925 for Achimota to be built, all because they were not much interested in educating the people. But because the missionaries wanted to Christianize the people, they felt they had to educate them to be able to read the Bible and have a little education to be able to help in spreading the gospel.
And also be humble and docile so that they don't disturb the operations.
And also to help them in administration, because you cannot rule a people when you do not understand their language. So when you educate a portion of their own people, it will be easier to spread colonialism. So areas where Islam was so endemic, they left them without any education. And today, we are still reaping the negative effects of the Berlin Conference, like northern Nigeria. Now there is this group, Boko Haram, because they were left out of education. Today, they believe that book is a haram or something to be hated. So Boko Haram basically...
So they're against Western education.
Against Western education. And look at what they are doing, thinking that when you kidnap girls or school children, that's very good of you. Whereas if there had not been colonialism, gradually, the African would have traded with his African brother, and they would have come to know that we are, after all, one. But because of Western influence, you leave out a whole area without any education whatsoever. So today he finds you alien and a stranger, and he thinks he has to fight you. In the case of Ghana, we were very lucky. At the declaration of our independence, the first Prime Minister Kwame Nkrumah felt that if we did not give free education to the Northerners, they would end up fighting Southerners and killing every Southerner because of the boundary, that imaginary boundary that had been laid down by the colonial masters.
Do you think that upon independence, these African leaders of that time in the 60s thought about these borders, and you think they were tempted to try and change the situation
That's a
with
very
the borders?
good question. You know, people like, very forward-looking people like Nkrumah had a philosophy that the whole essence of African independence was nothing more than disentangling whatever effect of the Berlin Conference, so that Africa would come together as one country again. So all those countries, incidentally, including even a country like Ethiopia that had not been colonized before, and some of the countries of the north, you know, excluding Morocco, the entire north wanted to be, not excluding Morocco. Morocco was included, yeah. The entire north, you know, excluding Tunisia, wanted Africa to unite. You know, Egypt wanted Africa to unite. Unfortunately for us, the entire French-speaking countries, less Guinea, you know, wanted to stay away. They did not understand the meaning of Africa coming together without France. You know, they did not understand. But thanks be to some of the foreigners, especially Britain. Britain felt that independence meant the end of the Berlin Conference, and we have to pack bag and baggage and leave these people. France had a different opinion altogether.
But did the British really leave? Because they're still here with neo-colonialism and their corporations and their businesses. Maybe it's easier for them to now run the country, their affairs without having too much investment.
Yeah, they are
in
not
their
forcing
colonies.
you to trade with them. But in the case of France, there is that obligation, you know, that compulsion that you should always belong to us. And we learned that even the OAU, now AU, some of the meetings, before they could sit down to tackle the agenda, they would have to first hold a meeting with France, and France would tell them what they should come and say over there. That has been the problem. So we cannot have one Africa. Scale it down to ECOWAS. You know, ECOWAS, the first idea of ECOWAS
Economic
is
Community of West African
West
States.
African to bring politics and economics together. They have not been able to establish the much needed ECO, that one central bank for West Africa, all because the French-speaking countries belong to the CFA zone, which is France's own money. And the French-speaking countries do not have a central bank, as in Ghana we have a central bank called Bank of Ghana, and then Central Bank of Nigeria. In the case of France, it is the French-speaking country, it is France that controls their monetary system. And every year they make billions of dollars out of the printing of currency for the huge area that they have. So how would they give up? So still the effect of the Berlin Conference is on.
What can we learn from this particular trip into history concerning the Berlin Conference?
What we can learn from is what we have begun, that we need to educate our people to understand that when you cross the border from, let's say, Boko or Navrongo, and you go to another country, Togo or Burkina Faso, you have not entered any new area. It's part of you. When you go to the west, whether you are Bono, Jula, and Zema, or whatever, it's still part of your people. When you go to the east, the our people over there, they are still part of your people. That is what we must know. The other thing is that I believe, I'm of the strong opinion that those belonging to the French system must also begin to know that their independence has not been fully complete. As a result, they need to learn more from their English-speaking brothers in order to extricate themselves completely from the French people so that they can fully be African.
Not too long ago, there was a gentleman who runs a, well, for want of a better word, a mercenary company. They call themselves independent, like an independent contractors. They do defense contract, but they are basically mercenaries. And he was calling for a recolonization of Africa. And just today, I was reading on one of my platforms, one of my friends who felt very frustrated by what's going around him, and he says, listen, in his mind, Nkrumah was not honest with us. He says that Africa is not ready to manage his own affairs. It's time to recolonize the continent, and so maybe the Berlin Project.
No, to say
what do you think about that? I mean, people have,
No.
a lot of Africans feel frustrated, and they feel that for some strange reason, it would be better if they were still being controlled by outsiders.
That's a very backward way of thinking, very negative. And I think anybody who thinks that way belong to the dark ages, because in the case of Ghana, for example, until 1951, when we had that internal freedom, then came 1952 when Kwame Nkrumah became independent prime minister, and immediately laid the foundation for what you call the 5-year development plan, where we started building factories here. We did not have a single factory because the colonial economy was only a raw material base.
Grow and ship away.
Ship away.
Grow and ship. Grow
so
and ship.
Today, if you find Volta River Authority, Bank of Ghana, name them, Ghana Commercial Bank, and then any other industry that is employing Ghanaians. Giwok was simply because we had our independence from these people. What I'm trying to say is that, but for independence, there would still not have been a single factory here, because they only came to till our land, use our people as slaves, and sent over there. It was also the independence of Ghana that triggered the civil rights movement in America. So until the 60s, the black people in America did not have the right to vote, no civil right. And until the 60s, black people did not attend the same schools as whites. And Nkrumah himself, when he was a student in America, he attended a black university then, Lincoln University. So they felt that they were first-class human beings. We were third-class human beings. The second-class human beings were the Asians, Indians, and then Sri Lankans and others, because their skins were closer to them. We were third-class human beings, as existed in South Africa, apartheid system. We had the white people on top, the colored people in the middle, being the Asians and Malaysians.
And the mixed race people.
Yes, mixed race. And then the black people like you and I were third, like animals. And then look at the way they took all our lands in places like Uganda, Kenya, Southern Rhodesia, that is Zimbabwe. And even today in South Africa, blacks don't have land in South Africa. You understand? So please, whoever says that makes a mistake. The only reason why we are seen to be failing is that any government that is Pan-African and would want to see Africa for Africans would be overthrown by the same Western system. And then they would, as in the case of a dog, give a dog a bad name
and then hang him.
You know, they will tell you that Nkrumah was a dictator, when in fact he established more than 60 factories in this country. And Ghanaians were saying work and happiness. And in those days, 50s, 60s, 70s, you snub your manager in one company in Tama, and they sacked you. You just cross the road and your manager will see that you have been employed over there. In those days, there was nothing like unemployment. By the time you left the School of Administration or any degree awarding department in the University of Ghana, Cape Coast, or KNUST, your bungalow was waiting for you, either as a teacher, as a nurse, or whatever. You understand? So please, let's sum up everything in the indelible words of Kwame Nkrumah. We prefer self-government with danger to servitude in tranquility.
What an eloquent way to wrap up this episode of History Time with me, Kafride, and my guest, Yao Anochi Frimpong. Thank you so much for delving into the background to the Berlin Conference of 1884-1885, so 140 years ago, where countries of Europe got up in Berlin and then took a map of Africa and drew lines and decided that this is where they were going to own. And those lines have remained with us until today, and the effects are far-reaching. Enjoyed this content? Thank you so much. Remember to subscribe so that and hit the notification bell so that when new notifications come up, you will be the first to know. What do you make of this? What you've just seen? Which country do you come from in Africa? Have you wondered what your borders look like? Now you know what they look like, and what do you think of what you've heard so far? I would love to hear from you in the comments below. Till next time, keep watching this channel for more history content. My name is Kafride. God bless.